Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today's podcast is guest experts. We have 2 guest experts today, and they are Jaya, Ramesh, and Priya, Saaral. And Priya and Jaya are both therapists. They're both moms. They're both neurodivergent, and they have just written a book. It's not quite out yet, but it is available for pre-order. It's called Parenting at the Intersections. And we had a super interesting conversation about parenting well neurodivergent. I know a lot of you listeners out there are neurodivergent. Parenting neurodivergent children, and I know a lot of you have neurodivergent children. And also talking about parenting in BIPOC families. So BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, if you didn't know that. And if you just listened to this description and you just thought, well, none of that applies to me, but you're a person who's interested in the world and a person who wants to be more compassionate and empathetic for those people around you, I still encourage you to take a listen to this. It was a really interesting conversation, and I learned a lot. And I think that we all in this moment in time where we're living, the world that we're living in, if we understood each other more, our lives would be better. So I encourage you, even if you don't feel like you fit into the topics that we're talking about today, I encourage you still to have a listen. And we can all just, as I said, we can all benefit from understanding each other better and understanding where each other are coming from. I hope you enjoy this conversation. If this conversation was something that you feel someone you know might like, please feel free to share it with them, screenshot it, text it to them. And also, we always want to reach more people and help spread the word about peaceful parenting. And the best way to do that is, aside from sharing, which is a great way to do it, is if you would rate and review the podcast on your podcast player, Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So let's jump in and meet Jaya and Priya. Hello, Jaya and Priya. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so I reached out to you originally. I was doing sort of a Google search for people who support parents who are neurodivergent in parenting. And I think I found Jaya first and reached out to you. And in the process, I learned that you also have a new book that's coming out in January. So we're going to have a fun conversation both about supporting BIPOC parents who have neurodivergent children and also about parenting while neurodivergent in general. So just to get us started, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
This is Jaya. I am, first and foremost, I'm a mom. I'm a mom to 2 kids, both of whom are neurodivergent. I'm also neurodivergent. Just a couple of years ago, I got diagnosed with ADHD, which just was one of the most clarifying things to learn about myself. I define myself primarily through all the relationships in my life, including being a wife, a daughter, sister, friend, auntie, and also a parent to an adorable dog who we also suspect probably has some ADHD. And in my professional life, I am a mental health therapist. I have a private practice, and I primarily work with BIPOC and neurodivergent couples, parents, adults, and just really, really love the work that I do. I also work with smaller organizations in supporting them in becoming more intentional and anti-oppressive. So that's another hat that I wear.
Very cool. Thanks, Jaya. Priya, what about you?
I am also a mom, and I am also a therapist like Jaya, and I specialize in working with children, so especially under the tween age. And I tend to get brain freezes. That's just part of my makeup.
No worries.
So I embrace that and roll along when I can. And yeah, with my story, I came to my learning of ADHD late in my life as well. And I don't think neurodivergent was that much of a buzzword as it is now, but definitely learning about my ADHD had, was the most validating thing I could hear for all the challenges I'd grown up with. And I think becoming a mom has really given me another layer of things to work on. And my child is also neurodivergent, and it gets really fun parenting this way. I am in private practice, but I also love working with parents in a coaching format. And so I do both. Yeah.
Nice. Well, welcome. Thank you. So, as you said, neurodivergent has become a bit of a buzzword, but let's just make sure that we can provide folks a definition of what we mean when we're talking about neurodivergent. Does one of you want to tackle that?
Well, I think before we define the word neurodivergent, I think it's helpful to have back up a little bit and just talk about this concept of normal that is so like part of our water that we swim in, and that we have standards in our society around what, and metrics that we use to assess what falls within normal range, right? Whether it's around brain functioning, wellness, how people look, skin color, there's all these sort of standards around what's considered quote unquote normal. And so while the truth is that there is just diversity across human species in brains and genetic makeup, all kinds of things, there's diversity just like we have biological diversity. We start to think about or talk about neurodivergent when we refer back to this very narrow standard of norm and say, oh, these brains are diverging from what we understand to be quote unquote normal. So ways that neurodivergence looks, like ADHD, we've mentioned, autism, learning disabilities like dyslexia, dysgraphia, just to name a few, right? And so there's others under that umbrella as well.
So your definition would be neurodivergent is what falls outside the range of what is considered normal. Is that what you're saying?
Right. And that
Quote unquote normal?
Quote unquote normal, and that normal is societally and culturally defined. And especially, we're based in the US here. These metrics were normed against really white, cis, het male boys, right? And so much of how we understand this is that also it's a conversation about whiteness and ableism in our cultural context.
I just had an interesting question come up. Do you think in other countries and different cultures, they have a different understanding of neurodivergence?
Great question.
We've definitely asked ourselves that. I do believe that there are, cultures that see neurodivergence differently, and I think there is a conversation to be had to learn about, how it's seen and how it's, even, I don't like the word treated, but how it's, how we hold it, right? How do we think about it? How do we see people with neurodivergence as part of society and part of our community? There's a lot to be learned from that. So I think that's definitely an important question to ask. I think going back to my sort of, tiny definition that I have, I think I love the context that Jaya, you're providing, because I think even in the definition of, well, neurodivergence can be seen as brains that think and learn differently. There's a big question there, differently from what? And so I think that is what, I think Jaya's really important context comes into play. Yeah.
And I think to add to your point about different cultures, and this might just be a different, conversation we're headed into. So, but I'll make it brief, which is so much of our understanding also comes from the field of psychology and, the diagnostic statistics manual that we're using to diagnose, right? And how in other cultures, I mean, this is not something I have an answer, but there's a way that I think Western psychology is an export, like it's a different form of colonization, right? And so that's getting taken in by different countries and groups of people. And so what I'm left wondering with is like, what were the sort of indigenous cultural ways of seeing differences in brains functioning,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, super. It could be a whole other book for you. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about just in the, sometimes when I think about masking, I think about that sort of the intersection of sexism and neurodivergence, right? Because so many girls and women are missed in when people are looking at autism or ADHD, because we're so socialized way more than boys are, right? To fit into the normal a lot more than boys are. So it's interesting to look at these intersections, which, maybe you could tell me how you decided to write Parenting at the Intersection, speaking of intersections.
Well, we'll tell you a little bit about the birth story of this book, and then we'll maybe share a little bit about our sort of personal inclination. We were invited to write this book as therapists who work with this population, and took the opportunity. But personally, for me, I was reflecting on why I said yes to writing this book. When my older kiddo was diagnosed with ADHD, now almost, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, I remember like looking for books and resources, because I'm kind of that's the thing I do. I like to, look for resources and books. And at that time, not really having the language as to why those books did not resonate for me, right? There was something that felt very uniform in the prescription of how to do things. And I think what I've come to understand for myself is it didn't really account for our our makeup as, immigrants, like our immigrant story, or the race piece, right? There was just something that was missing for me. So in this invitation to write the book, I was like really feeling a sense of like an awakening to, okay, I think there's something I know about this experience. And I think there are other parents out there who also have a similar experience of raising kids with multiply marginalized identities. And that needs to be surfaced.
Can you give me an example of what that might look like for somebody who's that not it's not their experience, for somebody who's not a person of color, what it might look like to not find yourself in the examples in the books.
Yeah. I mean, an example that comes to me is like navigating my kids' school, right? Getting a lot of like feedback from the school system about my kids' behavior. And as a parent, really having to, tease out what part of this is about my kids' ADHD, what part of it is racialized, like, and how much more, how do I assess and give weight to what feedback is being offered around, oh, he's being too loud and he's being disruptive and he's not following directions. And it's, it's like I have to do an extra layer of parsing, right, of what this feedback is really and where it's coming from. And then also then engaging with the school in a way that's not like it's assertive and advocating for my kid, because one of the things that we have to contend with as, and maybe we didn't name this explicitly, is we're both South Indian, right? Is we have that model minority thing, that expectation of that we won't rock the boat, we will, go with the flow. And so how to advocate for my kid, but also in a way that is not going to be written off as like, oh, these parents are just difficult.
Right. Yeah, I get it now.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think like I resonate with so much of what Jay is saying. I think for me, at the time that I started to write the book, my son hadn't been diagnosed yet, and it wasn't something that I was, not to say that I didn't have my own radar pinging, but I think a lot of, the children I was seeing, a lot of families I was supporting were, neurodivergent and many, many families of color. And I think that piece of those unspoken sort of rules or the values within cultures of color, that that there is a different sort of expectation that parents are sitting with in terms of how do I parent this child that is different from many people that I know, many other kids I know. And I think that cultural context came in a lot into my work with parents anyway. But I also think I said yes to the book because it was a deeper way of learning about myself and kind of going into my own story. And I honestly think, I think sometimes you're presented with experiences that are a growth opportunity for just what you need to be growing in. And I think it was such a beautiful way for me to reflect on my journey and really humanize my parents for knowing and doing the best they could. And I still know that they did so many things right. And, you know, that cultural context. And I'm a first generation immigrant like Jaya, and I grew up in a different context as a child. And so it was just a really important experience for me to be able to kind of hold what it was like at a different time, but also a different context. And what does it mean that I'm here now raising my child in this context in the US? And it felt like a really important circle to come around and to go deeper in my own healing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So what I'm getting the impression is like there are all these different layers to like challenges that people face, and when you have like when you're part of well, I'm just going to use this word because I can't think of the one I'm looking for, the quote unquote normal culture. There's that, and then you're neurodivergent. That's one layer, and then when you all of the other layers that you all are talking about, you found that was lacking, that experience that you were having and that you were seeing in the people that you were working with. And so this book is a way to bring all of those different experiences together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right on.
Yeah. So I want to get back to the intersections, but before we get there, do you mind sharing what, sort of some of your challenges that you find parenting well neurodivergent, or that you find are common? If you don't want to get too personal, that's fine. But what do you think is hard about parenting well neurodivergent?
I think there are lots of things to talk about here, but I know that, like, kind of going from what I was already sharing about this being a healing journey, I think that's sort of the place I'm at in terms of where we think about challenges is, I think for any parent, parenting is sort of an ask of self-discovery, right? And healing in terms of really being able to be present with the things that were hard for you in your childhood and being able to make meaning out of that, right? That gives you the sort of the understanding, the grounding with which we can then sort of have a healthy degree of separation from our child's struggles so that we can be present for our child in the way they need us to be. And I think when we're parenting with any challenge in neurodivergence is one such place that I think it's so easy for us to have our own stuff come up, especially if we're parenting a child that's also neurodivergent, but does not have to be. That stuff will come up regardless. We have our triggers, we have our fears, our guilt, our shame. So much of that is not just about what's happening in the moment with you and your child, but it's also about what were some unmet needs in your own life growing up, and who was there for you when you had a hard time, who is not there for you, or how were you asked to cope? What were your tools? All of those things, I think, is a big sort of connection for me when I think about the challenges. And so I think it's in that we can pivot to say, here is what it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for growth. And it's never too late to do this work. It's never too late to ask ourselves the reflective questions we need. It's never too late to cry about the time that we, were discriminated at school and nobody knew that it was because of our disability. And it's okay. It's okay to cry about that now. It does have impact. It does have, value to be able to release that. And so we can then be able to advocate for our child at school today with a lot more confidence than we would otherwise.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Sarah, so on a high level of parenting is about being that regulated nervous system to receive the cues your kid is sending, to read the miscues, right? And to offer that safe space for them. I think the place where, coming back to your question about where parenting while neurodivergent, there are some very sort of concrete ways where that place where we have to pick up cues and respond to our child can be challenged. So like I'll give you a very sort of concrete example sort of from my experience. And it's something I only like recently after my diagnosis put together. So when my kids were very, very little, little in the time where they just need oversight and they need your attention a lot. Now I'm like begging for their attention, but
No, those really hands-on
right,
years. Yeah.
right. Those hands-on years, I would find myself very, very burnt out and exhausted through like all the play dates and the reading time at the library and engaging with other moms, and really needed just like an hour or two to space out, right? And that's something I hear a lot of neurodivergent parents really talking about the like emotional shutdown that happens, right? And not really being like there's no space to do that. But I think there's also something as moms where we are maybe doubly penalized for just not being on all the time. Right. And so add to that layer of neurodivergence, and then add to that, like, race and so many of the moms that we spoke to for the book, Black moms and Latinx moms, there's other layers to how you get read as a parent. Another, example for me is I have sensory overload. So like I don't like it when kids crash into me, or right, the touchiness and things like that, or the smells. Like I'm so grateful I've had a partner who loved doing diaper changes. I didn't have to do them, right? Or the sounds. Kids are just loud. So I think all of those things, what it did was it took my regulation down, right? And so connecting back to what Priya is saying, like if we are to be that regulated presence, the piece where neurodivergence kind of makes an impact is that, okay, so this sensory overload is bringing how resourced I'm feeling. And so my response now may not be as resourced. And then the inevitable guilt and shame that follows, like, okay, I'm just not, being a good enough mom, right?
That comes up so much in my coaching because honestly, like the people who look for parenting coaches are the people who have kids that are what we're starting to call complex, right? Like the more challenging kids to raise. Like we laugh, we're like, you're not skipping through the field of daisies with your child like it looks like everybody else is, right? And often when parents have kids who are like that, they themselves, as we're all talking about here, also have neurodivergent brains. And, I talk to moms who just feel so terrible about how hard it is for them to regulate. And, it really comes down to what I talk to them a lot about is how sturdy is your nervous system just at its outset, right? And a lot of people who are neurodivergent, their nervous system is so much more sensitive than someone who's not neurodivergent, right? So then when you add on to that, like not enough sleep because you have a baby and, all of the pressures of additional things that take away resources, it's really, really hard.
Yeah. And I just also want to add this one more piece and really wanting to normalize, because I think there's so much shame around this, is that the piece of emotional overwhelm and anger and the irritability and the big emotions, right? And so I just, I think that's something I hear a lot of parents talk about. I know I've experienced it. And it's not only the nervous system that is so sensitive and finely tuned and responsive to the environment, but I also think those things are messages about the ways that our systems actually fail us,
So can you
right?
say more about that?
Like, I don't think, and this is the place where I really just take issue with my field of psychology and therapy, is I don't think it's in the individual. The anger isn't just,
Oh, you mean systems as in the systems that we're living in, not our nervous systems.
sorry,
Yeah, no,
yes,
I get
good
it.
clarification. Yeah. Like that we are embodying something that's more systemic, and it's not just like individually you're an angry
Well,
person or
yeah,
you're
I mean,
irritable or
but
right.
capitalism and patriarchy, put so much more of the load on moms than
Mhm.
on dads, and especially moms who quote unquote are not working, right?
Right.
So they never have any time because they don't earn money, so they don't get time, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's making me, I resonate with like so much of, being such a deep feeler. It has, it comes into every single thing I do, right? It can be such a great gift, but it can also be a big challenge in terms of getting the hard thing done. So I think for me as a parent, I remember my early years of parenting where driving my kid to school, even just like managing all the appointments and going to places, and I was chronically late to school. Like I just was getting up on time, getting his breakfast done, and then getting the next lunch packed and getting myself ready for work. And the amount of steps, the amount of cognitive overload causes so much of emotional overload. And that makes me inevitably cranky and just impatient with, why can't we just get out the door for once on time? And it was a lot of work. And I still, I had to let go. I had to let go that it took me a while to get there, but I knew that at some level I just had to accept that I am a slow moving person in this world. That's just me. And I know that that is causing my son to be late, but I'm glad that we had understanding teachers, and and I eventually, there were moments I was not, and then there are times when my son's late and I'm not, so and it's inevitably something happens and we're late anyway. So, so I think I just had to give up and accept that, punctuality is not my thing. And I think my sort of inner rebel is fighting that, culture of time, and that you're only to be taken seriously if you're on time, and if not, that you don't care, and I don't think
That's the capitalism thing again.
yeah, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
So that's
I mean,
something.
my team and I are sort of like on a mission to take the perfection out of peaceful parenting, because so many people that come to this approach, like they either don't understand it because they've just seen some, Instagram reels and think it's one thing, or they're just really hard on themselves, or a combination. But we really try hard to make so much room for self-compassion. And when you are late, like, I mean, I was blessed with like an enormous amount of not caring what other people think. So for me, I'm just like, who cares? Like, I don't care if they're judging me, but I know for some people that's really hard. But then when you layer the race piece on top of that, for some other folks, you get well, they don't have the liberty that I have as a white woman to say, like, I don't care what other people think, a white middle class woman. I have that entitlement, right? So what do you suggest? I know your book is not like the, here are the 5 steps to the framework, sort of start here and end here type of book. But what do you suggest for those parents who are parenting well neurodivergent? And just tell me a little bit more about your big ideas. Of course, we want people to pre-order the book. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. But just tell us a little bit about your sort of big ideas.
Yeah. On a very, very high level, I think this book does a couple of things. We intentionally set out not to write a how to book. And so we have really thought about parenting and how it is embedded in larger systems of supremacy and capitalism, and how, because it is in that larger context, as parents, we have ingested messages from these systems, right, on what it means to be good, worthy, desirable, productive, all the things. And, our parents have passed that down to us because they're also part of the same system. And that our children who are, neurodivergent, BIPOC, that they actually are offering us an opportunity in a way to investigate and reconsider these messages that we have like taken in wholesale, right? So we do this by not only sharing a lot of stories from parents we've interviewed across the country about their experiences with various systems, including schools and medicine and technology and the juvenile justice system, and offering our readers really questions and reflective moments to consider what they already know. There's like wisdom that parents have that we sometimes are we release or relinquish, because that's what this what we live in requires us to do. It says, go look out for this resource, go look out for this. So rather than being a book that says we have the answers, we're actually just creating the container for parents to feel validated, reflected by hearing other parents, but also tune into their own wisdom. And we believe that there is what we call the parenting love ethic in the book, informed by Bell Hook's love ethic. And we go through what that love ethic is and how parents can really carve out a path towards their own emancipation and for their kids. So, yeah.
Nice. When you talk about tuning into parents' own wisdom, I find that really tricky because I find that people don't often know, like, and when you say that, I don't know Bell Hook's love ethic, but when you talk about love, and I think of that as the tuning into the wisdom of, like, what would I do if I was just responding to my child with love, right? And what they need and meeting their needs. But so often parents don't do that because they're overwhelmed by fear, right? Of, like, what will other people think? My parents, would judge me for letting them, quote, get away with this, especially people who are raised with, let's just say, not peaceful parenting, right? Like more conventional parenting or authoritarian parenting. So how do you help people sort out tuning into their wisdom when there are all these other factors, as I just mentioned, the fear factor especially?
Yeah, I really appreciate that you're bringing this up, because that is really sort of the message throughout the book, and that these feelings are valid. They're here for a reason. And how do you tend to them in ways that can help you think well about yourself and about your child and about your community, right? And I think there's an invitation that we have throughout the book to be able to be with yourself in a practice, and kind of as we're talking about the parenting love ethic, that is a practice. We recognize that it's not a one overnight tool that's going to shift these fears magically into confidence. As long as there are systems of oppression above us, these feelings are bound to come up over and over again, right? And so how do we tend to them in ways that we can sort of clear the cache, as we speak, to be able to open up our availability and our energy for for what's in front of us right now, right? And one of the tools, if it's helpful to mention a tool, is the tool of listening. And we have sort of offered listening in sort of multiple ways. There are so many ways to listen and to be listened. One particular practice that Jay and I also do with each other and have done throughout the book as well is something that I take from the Hand in Hand parenting framework, and it's called the listening partnerships model. This is just one way of a practice where you are making time to listen to one another in a dyadic form. It could be a different form in a group form too, but having a regular practice to set time to listen to each other in this way gives us, permission to release some of these fears that we're holding. A lot of these are subconscious and conscious thoughts and connections that can become more explicit in a listening format where you are going where your mind takes you. And that can really be a great way to sort of clear and make connections and process old hurts that you may be holding. There's a process to it. I'm not getting too into it right now, but I just wanted to give you an example of why that can be helpful. As to, I've often find myself that after getting listening time for myself, I am able to realize the hard thing that I was sitting with, and sometimes be able to know exactly why. But more importantly, I'm just able to feel more confidence and more energy to tackle the fear that's in front of me, right?
I would also add that, we discount the body so much. And throughout the book, there are somatic practices to help parents really connect to the body as a way of knowing the fear or knowing the grief and building capacity to be with it. So one of the premises is really that the wisdom is there. It comes from our ancestors, right? But there's just so much noise and blockage that keeps us from actually knowing. And we, even with these tools, we don't want to be like so prescriptive. And even that, I think people, the encouraging we're really doing is find the practice that supports you, and the belief that you know deep down there is, and what we want is for parents to be able to access that. And part of that knowing is really also tuning into, there's certain things that our children are doing or saying that gets coded as problematic. But what if the things, those behaviors, those things that they're saying or regulating themselves in a way, what if there's actually medicine in them? What if we tune into them at that level, right? And so this wisdom is also co-created between us and our children.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm putting you on the spot, but can you give an example of the wisdom and medicine that could be encoded in their children's, behavior that maybe feels challenging?
Yeah, when I think of my kids, and so one thing, so I'm trying to think about how to say this carefully in a way that also protects my kids' confidentiality. I'll frame it this way. I have really learned to respect and also employ a strategy that my kid uses to honor when they're just done, right? I think in the past, my fear and my worry about what will others say would have been like, no, no, you need to get down here and like you need to engage with people and you need to be present. And I think just noticing what is the function of what they're doing, right? And what it's serving has been a lovely portal for me to like kind of go back and say, huh, actually, I need that too.
So you're saying, like, if it's Thanksgiving dinner and the, grandparents and people are over and your kid doesn't want to stay at the table, whereas before you might have tried to force them to, or some
Mm-hmm.
people might try to force them to, but you're honoring that they're saying what their needs are.
Right. And that there's some wisdom there, but also that I can maybe use that to just also reflect for myself. And like there's not only that that insistence that I was doing is a loyalty and a fidelity to these ideas of what it means to be socially connected, right? Again, coming from what we've normalized and say is the standard. And then maybe it's also something I really need too, and I've never given myself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
I love that. Just going back a little bit to talking about parenting while neurodivergent, are there any specific sort of practices that you want to share that you found helpful when there is that touched out, low resources, all of the things that we had just identified as being really challenging?
So this one is, sorry, I'm just gonna pause for a sec. The piece where I feel very touched out, and here's where it connects back to the wisdom thing again, I think. Honoring that has been also a way for me to teach my kids consent. So my little one, who is a very, very like physically affectionate, just likes to kind of like come and hug and squeeze. It's been great to have conversations with him of, I love to hug you, and I am surprised and startled when you crash into me. So I think it's really important to ask people, are they ready for a hug? And so I love that my 10-year-old boy will come and say, can I give you a hug? And I just think that is, you know, helpful for me, but I think it's also something that has been helpful to teach him.
We're talking about tools that neurodivergent parents can use that to support them. Yeah. Yeah, I think when I think about struggles with like getting the day-to-day things done, I have benefited from having somebody by my side, even if I know that, even if they're able to be on a Zoom call with me while I'm cooking or paying my bills, or maybe that's too much to do at the moment, and even texting to let them know that this is something I'm going to do, and having some affirmations and being able to receive some affirmations from people I love, and that gives me the extra energy and to sort of go back and do that hard thing. And I think there's so many strategies out there when you really think about, how can somebody with lots of sensitivities parent. And I'm also drawing on my work with parents who've had, struggles with sensory overwhelm, where sometimes their needs, kind of like Jaya's anecdote, sometimes the parent's sensory need is in direct conflict with the child's need, right? So if music is regulating for the child, but music isn't something a parent can do, or that particular music, how do you find middle ground there? And how do you regulate yourself to be able to, find and provide that co-regulation for your child? And I think there's so much of that is, very context specific, and really digging into what helps the parent be more regulated. What are some creative ways in which you can find that regulation for yourself, even if you're single parenting, even if, you're the only one at the moment. I think it's hard to sort of go there without having all the sort of pieces to play around with. But I do think, there's a lot of value to, particular tools. Even I'm thinking of, there's these I'm forgetting the name, but these loops. Thank you. Yes. That can be such a huge gift.
We're pointing at our ears, but they can't see us. But we're talking about earplugs. Loop brand. We don't have any affiliation with Loop brand, but I do like that brand of earplugs. Yeah. So just and it's not that you can't hear your kids anymore, but it's just bringing down the noise level to a level that's not really irritating your nervous system.
Yeah.
And
I think sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, what I think I hear you saying is, that parents' needs matter too, right? And I think, especially in the context of what I'm seeing a lot of people getting wrong about peaceful parenting or responsive parenting, is we've moved from where the parents' needs are the most important in like an adultism culture, right? Parents' needs and preferences are the most important in conventional parenting. But people are making the mistake of flipping that when they want to be responsive parents or conscious parents or peaceful or whatever, to saying that now the child's needs are the most important. And of course, there are babies that need to be fed in the middle of the night, and you have to meet that need, even if it's hard for you. But it's not an either or. Like it's not. It's like what you're saying, Priya, is we have to find a way to honor our own needs, and especially as neurodivergent parents, that can be hard because our needs might be bigger than a neurotypical's parents' needs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And what beautiful modeling for our children too, when we can do that for ourselves, right? Because it's then teaching them that they get to do that for themselves, and their needs matter. And
totally. Yeah. You can't tell your child that it's important to, say what you need if you're not doing that as well, because they always do what we do, not what we say, right? So before I let you go, I have one question. This is a surprise question, unless you're a regular podcast listener. I have one question for each of you, which is, if you could go back in time to your younger parent self, what advice would you give yourself?
For me, I think an affirmation feels most calling. I think we do what we do. We go through life. We find the people that can support us, and we sort of find our way somehow. And I don't know that I think the advice that I needed, I received when I needed them, right? I think I would say just having someone right there and to say, you got this moment shall pass, that would have been really affirming during the moments I was crying while I was driving my son to school.
Late again.
Again.
I love that. What about you, Jaya?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's such a good question. I would say maybe to not compare myself to other parents so much. I would have wanted my younger self to know that. And I would definitely want parents now to hear that too. I think that's the thing I really also just love about our book is it's like there's so many different ways to parent, right? Even though there's an experience that all these parents we interviewed shared around parenting at the intersections, just the experiences themselves are so different and how they approach their kids, right?
And I would say, even, for our listeners who are neither neurodivergent nor a person of color, I would say that this book is going to have value because it's going to help you understand all of the other people around you, right? And what we need is for more compassion and more empathy for each other, especially in the times that we're living in, right? It's so important to really try to understand things from another person's perspective. So thank you for writing this book.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Where's the best place for people to find out more about you and what you do? We'll put some links in the show notes, but if you just want to shout it out.
Yeah, we have a website. It's parentingattheintersections.com. We have an Instagram handle, and that is parenting.at.intersections.
Dots everywhere.
All right.
Dots everywhere. Yeah, those are 2 great places to find us.
Good. Well, hopefully people will connect with you there. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.